Renegade thinkers. In preparation for this show, now I always prepare, and I was watching a very well-produced virtual event summarizing the technology trends of 2021. Now, like you, I find it hard to just watch something when I've got emails coming in on one screen and Slack on another and SMS on my phone. So don't ask me to play back all the trends, but here's the gist of it. The pandemic forced about 6 years of digital transformation into a few months. And for many business leaders, 2021 is, in quote, a moment of truth, an ultimate test of, now pay attention here, IQ, EQ, and something Accenture labeled TQ, as in technology quotient. So for you CMOs, it's not enough for you to be strategically smart. You also need the emotional intelligence, particularly empathy, to stay connected with your teams. And you need enough digital savvy to make sure your company isn't getting left behind in yesterday's analog ways. Now, I know most of you are, in fact, pretty high on your TQ quotient. But if that trifecta of IQ, EQ, and TQ wasn't a big enough test, brace yourself as we enter a new world of hybrids, hopefully this year, assuming lots of people get vaccinated, because we're going to have home and work at, home office and work office. We're going to have physical and virtual events. We're going to have streaming video and live theater. Now, all of that said, near the end of the virtual event, there is one moment in this presentation by Paul Doherty, Accenture CTO, that I can remember verbatim. It was a quote from a Chinese proverb that goes like this: when the winds of change blow, some people build walls, others build windmills. Some build walls, some build windmills. I'm definitely in the windmill camp. CMO huddles, which I've talked about and we'll talk about again later in the show, started in 2020. It's a windmill. But what about you? Are you building walls between you and your teams, between you and your customers? Or are you harnessing the winds of change? Are you letting the change flow through your organization and your customer relationships? Okay, enough with philosophizing, and you're going to have to trust me. All of that made sense because today's guest is Amy Fuller, the CMO of Accenture. Yes, the company whose virtual event I mentioned a second ago. Amy started her career on the agency side with stops at Ogilvy and Y&R, followed by a long run at MasterCard and almost 5 years at Deloitte before joining Accenture in August 2017. I bet that feels like ages ago. Anyway, since then, Amy has the distinction of having worked for 3 different CEOs, a challenge we will definitely talk about. But our main story today is about the massive rebranding project that Amy and her teammates recently went through. And with that, Amy, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Drew. That was the best setup ever.
Oh, see,
Joining
there you go.
you and also the Paul Doherty quote. And I do have to provide one more tidbit about Paul
Please.
Doherty with the wind quote. The
Yes.
guy is a really serious sailor. So I was like,
Oh.
sailboat, sailboat, sailboat when you said windmill, but I guess he didn't feel that he could adulterate the actual proverb. But
Yeah, well, I don't want to go all political on you, but when I saw that phrase and I'm thinking about walls that were built and windmills and things, and I'm thinking, oh my God. And I actually tried to find how long ago that proverb came from, because I would love it for be hundreds of years old.
and
I
what?
didn't find it. I
Hey,
couldn't
he
find
made it
it.
up. Maybe it's brand new.
No,
No,
it's
Paul would never
definitely,
do that.
it's one of those that shows up a lot in those, photos with wonderful words on it. But, and I'm a sucker for those, I admit it. So, but we are in the business of not walls, but windmills. So first, where are you? I think guests always like to know today because you could be anywhere.
So I'm in my tiny little study in Manhattan where I have been a lot. I know it well now. I know every crevice of every wall at this point.
Yeah, well, I know that you, like me, as a Manhattanite and New Yorker at this point in our lives, are really hoping that New York will come back soon. I was so upset with the Post headline today, just so negative on New York. I really wanted to, well, what can I say? But are you seeing, by the way, personally, do you see, I mean, besides Sides of Spring, are you sharing any optimism about New York and it's coming back?
Well, I have a reading to recommend, actually, which is Here is New York by E.B. White, and he published it in 1949. And in it, he makes all, I mean, it's a fabulous read. And what is so funny about it is he makes this point about New York has no right to actually exist. It should fall under its own weight of failing infrastructure. So this was written in 1949. And
I
I
love
thought,
it.
well, we're in a classic location, classic problems and classic endurance. So I'm very optimistic.
I love it. Yes, nothing like a little historical perspective. We've gone through this before and we will get through it again. So I mentioned in the setup that you came to work for three CEOs. And we all know the importance of this relationship. So how's that worked out?
So, I mean, it would not have been expected. I was hired by a wonderful, iconic man named Pierre Nunterme, who unfortunately stepped down and subsequently died a little over a year
Oh
of my
gosh, how
tenure
sad.
at Accenture. And he was succeeded by another truly outstanding human being who's currently our board chair, had been the CFO, and he was our interim CEO as we conducted the search, landing on yet another truly iconic CEO, Julie Sweet, who took post a year ago last September, has been just a whirlwind of energy on literally every front, but absolutely on the brand. And anything I can talk about today is because of the energy that she's brought to the entire place.
And I want to talk about that. It's we had a we had a super huddle recently where we had three CEOs join, about 45 CMOs, and the whole focus was the CEO CMO relationship. And one thing that struck me is how different CEOs are from each other in style and temperament and in understanding of marketing. So, and one of the things that was also clear is that CMOs have to adjust to the styles of their CEOs. So, and first of all, so you've had three in 3 years. Is that a fair generalization that you sort of needed to adjust a bit to their styles each time?
Oh, I mean, absolutely for sure. I mean, it's always said that leaders bring the weather, but CEOs really bring the vision. And so the content, the substance of what you deal with, that in and of itself is a pretty significant uh, factor in what you're doing.
Yeah, bringing the vision is such a great statement. It's funny. I had one CMO recently lament. He's saying, when I got on the job, I thought the CEO had great vision. Now he's presented 19 different visions, and now I realize maybe perhaps he doesn't." So vision is not something that you necessarily change. It's sort of like you spend some time getting there, and then you go for it, right? I mean, this is so. Let's talk about Julie Sweet, your current CEO, and how that set up the need for the rebranding.
Well, it was, I mean, I got to say, it was the most amazing 12 months of change to have gone through because what was going on is we were nearing the conclusion of what had been the business strategy when I came in, shorthanded rotation to the new. And so one of the things that Julie got to work with immediately is, well, what is the business strategy, let's say through 2025? So that was foundational. That was one piece. Second piece that was also absolutely foundational is we knew we had not articulated a purpose. And that's very behind the times, I will say, for any cutting edge company like ourselves. So that was something that also needed to happen. And at the beginning of both of those efforts, I remember Julie saying to me, well, what about the brand, Amy? Because we had a brand that was dubbed New Applied Now, which was perfect sync with the rotation to the new business strategy. I said, well, we wouldn't be able to answer the question, what about the brand, until the business strategy and the purpose both land. And then
So,
obviously, there you
yeah.
go.
And so I want to talk about how those things interact and really, so in an ideal world, let's think about there's a business strategy, right? This is how we're going to grow and this is who we're going to serve, and you're going to make some definitions. Um, and that typically in an ideal world, marketing gets to inform a little bit, because certainly marketing can be baked into that business strategy. But when does purpose become part of business strategy, and business strategy drive purpose?
Well, purpose, the way I see purpose is meant to endure kind of forever. Business strategy, on the other hand, is about fueling growth right now. And I'm sure it varies by sector, but within a fast changing sector, which is so informed by technology as ours is, there's no such thing as the forever business strategy.
Right.
It is the what do clients need right now to grow. And then that's our answer to how we would grow as well. So there's a
So
big time frame difference.
yeah, no, and I get it, and it's true. And business strategies have to change because marketplaces change. And so, but getting to a purpose. So if in fact there wasn't a purpose, and the purpose of the organization was to make money for the shareholders, right? I mean, that's typically what the purpose of most organizations are, if it isn't stated in a different way.
Well, so I would say that's the objective. The purpose operates on really three levels. Purpose, I would argue, done well, really gets at three things: what you do, why you do it, and then how you do it. And so, depending on the nature of your business, the sector, who you are, you might lean heavier on why versus how. Now, our purpose ended up, and this was, months of careful work and workshopping, lean towards how, because our purpose, where we landed was our purpose is to deliver on the promise of technology and human ingenuity. That is how we do it: technology and human ingenuity. And then the business strategy, by contrast, is about driving 360-degree value for our clients by embracing change. How we do that is delivering on the promise of technology and human ingenuity. So that is how they fit together. And in that way, it's the promise should last into the indefinite. Nothing's forever, but you don't redo your purpose certainly even every couple of years. It's meant to be your North Star for a good long period of time.
So let's talk a little bit about so what, why, how, Simon Sinek, perfectly, golden circle. What were some of the key steps that you went through? Because I mean, consulting firms, and I know this from talking to other CMOs at other consulting firms and having actually worked with several, the typically they are really fiefdoms on a global level, fiefdoms on a practice level of individuals who have an expertise and have a set of clients. And, there's some common methodology and some common things, but it's people, right? And so I would imagine that process that you went through to find this purpose had to involve a lot of people. Can you talk about it?
Yeah, I loved our process. I loved it. And I think had we not followed the process we did, we would never have landed, let alone well. And Accenture does operate because we are a global publicly traded company, we are actually in contrast with fiefdoms and other business models that might exist. We have a single, we are one Accenture. Our differentiator is the breadth of what we're able to do for our clients. So putting that aside, though, we had, I would say, three primary kinds of input. And the first was in-depth leader interviews. And interestingly, at the beginning of the process, our global management committee, there were about 18 of us. And so that was the core of our leader group. In roughly the middle of the process, we enacted a big growth model change. So guess what? The 18 people became more like 40. Whoa. And it wasn't all the same 18. So it was a new combination, some of the same familiar characters. But so we had a lot of leader input. But the other thing that really mattered, we have 540,000 people. And so we invited all to give us input, and we got, good levels of participation. We made sure that we had representation from all geographies, all service lines, and all degrees of tenure in the business. So we were capturing all of the generations, well, work-wise and demographically in our workplace. And so that was really, really significant. And then the third was, a good, healthy, external, impartial expert kind of a view. So think of chief economists and the like, just to make sure that we weren't being overly, sequestered in our own place. And so the inputs then led to what ended up being.
Let me pause you there for a second.
Absolutely.
So, because I've got a bunch of questions on all of this, but we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to dive into a couple of those things because I have lots of thoughts on them. Okay, so stay with us. I want to take a second and plug CMO Huddles. Launched in 2020, CMO Huddles is an invitation-only subscription service that brings together an elite group of CMOs to share, care, and dare each other to greatness. One CMO described Huddles as timely conversations with smart peers in a trusted environment. Love that. Another called them a cross between an executive workshop and a therapy session. If you're a B2B CMO that can share and care with the best of them, visit cmohuddles.com. Okay, we're back. And we're talking, Amy is just walking us through this extensive process. And I just want to put a big punctuation on this. Whether you're at a small company or a big company, if you are going to establish a purpose or change your purpose, you need a lot of people involved. And so one thing you talked about is having a leadership committee. That's really important because if this is just sort of a marketing initiative, it won't work. Two, you talked about surveying a bunch of people out in all geographies so employees feel part of it. It's not just that you want that information. It's also that you want them to know that you want their voice. Okay, and then the third thing is you got outside perspective. What I miss in that, and so how long, let's just get a sense of how long it took you from deciding we were going to find our purpose to through this phase of research.
Well, so I would say we started in September, and we started workshopping in the fall, and with Julie, our CEO, and just a smaller group, and we workshopped. We were trying to count it the other day. I don't know how many workshops we did, but the idea was never sell, ever. It was never sell. It was share the thinking, share the language. And there was part of this was an analysis of, well, what are others saying in our competitive set? Because one of the most important criteria was it must be differentiating. We can't just describe the category. That will not work for us.
Thank you for saying that word. And that is, it is the goal of any marketer to differentiate your brand, full stop. It's just got to be part of your thinking. And I think it's interesting. I mean, you are the leader in your category. So you, in theory, could sell the category. But nonetheless, you have strong competition. So it was important that this be unique and distinctive to Accenture. That's valid. I know I'm stating the obvious, but I just want to.
Yeah, no, it is. And we have a very mixed competitive set. So I think probably most categories are complicated, but we have a very mixed set depending on what it is we are working with clients, from boutique on up. So it's defining the category would be tricky indeed. And we want to be an of one, of one. So,
of one only. Yeah. And that's one of the torture tests or litmus tests for any kind of statement, like a purpose statement is, could a lot of other people say it?
Exactly.
Okay, so you go through this process for the fall, and first of all, were you working with an external partner on this?
Well, this was the best part of all. Droga 5 had just joined us as part of Accenture Interactive.
Right.
And so they were brand new as part of Accenture and then as our agency. And so it was, hi, welcome on board. Now you're going to do our work. Also, we're going to be one of your clients, so to speak, and we've got to figure out our purpose. Welcome. And it was fantastic. It was fantastic. I just I can't even, well, I probably could dimensionalize fears that could manifest going into that kind of a situation because we're incredibly hard to understand.
Right.
But
And
what happened was it was like the world's best thing. But then we had to take not an out and out pause. We were still working in the background, but around the middle of that fall period, we started doing really, really intense work on the growth model that we then needed to launch in short order. And so that was a short fuse project that was quite comprehensive and involved a lot of marketing and communications activity and thinking and resource. As it turns out, we landed in our last in-person global management committee meeting before the crisis, which was February, a full year ago, was when we landed with what had become now the 40 or so person global management committee. And the end result of all of those workshops, we landed the language, then we left Tokyo. And then, of course, lots of other stuff happened, but I'll hold back on all of the
yeah.
agonizing details.
So when in the process up to getting to your purpose statement, deliver on the promise of tech and human ingenuity, or close to that,
Yep.
were there any aha moments for you?
Oh, a gazillion. Now, one thing on the process, I would say, and the benefit of having multiple workshops versus any kind of orientation that would say, let's sell it, is that we started out in a good, kind of differentiating territory, but it was fairly general. And as we workshopped it, we got more and more specific. And I think the differentiation comes from the specificity of the language. And it was really interesting to see what it takes for that to happen. You need the room of people who really know the place and the space and are brainiacs in their own right. And then to kick it around and sleep on it and then kick it around again. So that was a good finding, a really good finding about the about process of creation, quite honestly.
So okay, so we get to that. We have to put it on hold. Talk a little bit about how then they're just words on a page. At some point in time, they have, in order to become real and really driving things, you have to sort of, they can become part of the operations. They can change employee evaluations. They can change, the way we talk about the business. Talk a little bit about how you sort of started to dimensionalize this, and because this is just words, right? How do you make it real?
And actually, it was not on hold ever, but when we went, into our tiny studies in Manhattan in equivalencies, the work that then happened was, okay, now we know we need to redo the brand.
Okay, right.
And
right.
so the redoing of the brand idea was 100% virtual, which I have literally never seen happen.
Right.
So, but your actual question about how to infuse it.
Let's talk about some of that. So let's go. We don't have time to do the whole thing, but so what's up for grabs when we talk about brand in your case, besides a new tagline to replace the one that you had mentioned already?
You reply now? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. So when we're talking about brand, what were sort of the key components that we should be focused on?
Yeah, I mean, the thing was, because we are all about our clients, we had paid a lot of attention in the business strategy development and the purpose development of what do our clients think and what do they need? How can we help them? How are we uniquely able to help? And one of the things that we've been seeing for actually for a couple of years. So not a brand new thing, but a thing that was heightening in importance is this idea that change is perpetual. And if there was ever a moment where you did a transformation, say a digital transformation, and then you're good to go for a couple of years or X period of time, not anymore, never, probably never again.
Yep.
It's a continuous state. And so that raises a lot of questions. And so if we were about delivering 360-degree value, how? How do we do that? And it is, well, one of the tidbits that I found the most helpful was coming out of actually our brand tracker, as well as qualitative client research that said, okay, so how do you pick a professional services provider? We did some regression analysis. Number one is knowledge of my industry. Number two, ability to help me handle change. And Accenture did spectacularly well on that dimension.
Mm.
And so the idea that we are helping clients 360-degree, but to embrace change was what led us to the line of let there be change.
And
And that was optimism. It was, it was hopeful.
yeah, oh my gosh. I mean, let's face it, it's let there be light. I mean, there's some, one can get to that it's a big promise. And I think back to your days at Ogilvy, there was a creative director there who said big brands do big things. Well, this is certainly a big promise of, let there be change. But I want to go back to something that I think is so interesting and so important as you're looking for these, as other CMOs are thinking about it. You looked at the brand tracking. You could have said, well, number one, most important is knowledge. So let's make our brand about that and our deep, deep industry expertise. But you know what? That's kind of what's interesting to me. You went to number two instead. And to me, I'm guessing industry knowledge is sort of table stakes to some extent. Handling change feels like something that you could own.
Oh yeah, you've nailed it, Drew. It's the question is what is important where differentiation lives. It's got to be really important, but we've got to be able to differentiate. And industry and knowledge is a really big part of our storyline and how we go to market, in fact. So it's not that we've neglected it. And in fact, the whole idea of our campaign is to drive to further involvement with Accenture. For example, you know, getting involved with our thought leadership in all of its many, many forms and formats and topic areas. And that is what we're tracking, actually, is are people doing that? Luckily, the answer is yes, they are, and much more so than they have in the past. So,
and I want to make sure I understood that because I think I was writing down something and say that again, just in terms of people doing something.
So the whole idea of the campaign is to entice further engagement with Accenture. And in most cases, what that will look like is involvement with the many, many pieces of thought leadership we put out that address big trends and they address industry knowledge, industry trends as well. So that's how we're connecting the things that are
Right.
the levers of preference in our marketing mix.
Right. And so it's interesting. Now you have this giant context, right? If it's let there be change, then rather than here's the trends. And I mean, obviously, as change, you need to focus on trends even more than you might have before. But it's in the context of what is changing, right? You now have to look everything in terms of what is changing, what is good change. And I did think, by the way, I did connect some of the dots there from your trends presentation and this notion of change. It's interesting. Obviously, there was some consistency there. I am curious about how you introduced this to employees and if there was time to introduce it to them before you launched it publicly.
Yeah, it was how we launched it. In some ways, you could argue was more important than what we were launching, given that we have 540,000 people. And as I always say, they are not brand ambassadors. They are the brand,
Mm-hmm.
quite literally.
Yep.
And so we put together a series of events. And the first thing we did was to put together, it sounds incredible now, 3-hour virtual meetings with all of our managing directors. So that's roughly, think about 8,000 people.
Wow.
And we do everything twice because we're global. We do the evening and then the morning,
Mm-hmm.
East Coast, to cover all time zones. So we did it twice. And it needed to be 3 hours because it was a very in-depth walkthrough. What is our business strategy of delivering 360-degree value? But luckily, I would say, thank goodness we've got people in the organization who are experts in how adults learn. And guess what? It's not 3 hours of PowerPoint. That would not be how adults learn. And so we put together a very dynamic, using the best platforms that we were using at the time, panels, discussions, different pieces, videos, and it got incredible response and participation. So that was the first thing. Then a couple of weeks later, to the entire organization, again, these two virtual things, shorter though, let's call it 75 minutes. But similarly, a very dynamic virtual presentation of here's our strategy, here's our purpose, here's our brand. And that was the day before we launched it. That was essentially the launch though, because once you talk to that many people, you've launched it.
Yeah. So for the how many weeks before the official launch, when you first did these the 3-hour virtual
Yeah.
events, how far in advance was that to the launch?
That was 4 weeks. And it was 4 weeks because I think we might have had earnings in between. We had a
Right.
reason to wait.
Right.
It could have been closer together, but it was actually nice to have the strategy settle among the leadership crew.
So one of the things that's really interesting to me is when these, we're talking about business strategy, purpose, and brand in one fell swoop being introduced to 540,000 people who, as you say, are the brand. What kinds of things, what changed at Accenture that made these things real?
Well, so then what happened is after the virtual event, and we've used this model for other big things as well, is centrally led, but locally brought to life. And the center led means all the materials, the messaging, the thinking, the ideas need to be highly consistent because the ill of any big organization is fragmentation. But the strength is segmentation, and that applies to the internal population as well. So after we did the big launch, then we had many, many fun things for people. But one of the things we did is that then the markets, so we have three, we're organized by, three, North America, Europe, and then growth markets, did their own events based on the same material, but with the freedom to do their own events. And so it made it much more relevant, much more tailored to the people in the markets. And that worked incredibly well. And we have a series of, additional activations that will go on probably indefinitely as well.
Okay, so we have to take another break. We'll dive into this a little bit more and then really try to bring together some of the biggest lessons learned of all this. Okay, stay with us. Okay, we're back. And it's interesting to me. So far we have focused on the internal launch and how you sort of allowed, and I love this notion of segmentation, not fragmentation. It's such a good insight just in and of itself. And these are what I'm hearing you talk about is the communication of this idea and this new platform to speak about and I guess the business strategy. What I was trying to get to is, so, organizations tend to follow what is measured, right? And
Right.
so, and that drives organizations. So if I'm a CMO and I'm measured based on, the delivery of 50% of pipeline or then that's what I'm going to focus on. And if I'm an engineer and I have to get X number of projects done, I'm going to focus on that. And when you introduce a new strategy and a purpose and a thing, it becomes real when suddenly it shows up in, how you're evaluated and what you're measured on, to me. And I'm just curious if that worked into any of this.
Well, I actually have to think about that. I mean, what we have always, owed, in fact, the board and ourselves are increases in brand value, because we're a very well branded enterprise. And so that is what we've been delivering. What we owed, what I believed we owed the organization was because we had tripled our paid media budget, our brand budget, we needed to exceed that in terms of the metrics that we were able to deliver in the campaign. And so that is how we look at the campaign in a variety of measures that get at preference shift and engagement, and other things that should be affected by a brand campaign. For the purpose, by contrast, though, the question around purpose was, do you know we have one? Because, and we did, as part of an all people survey, and this was terrifying, I have to say. It wasn't about purpose, and it was in field just a handful of weeks after we had launched purpose. So guess what one of the questions was? Do you know we have a single purpose? I'm like, oh no, it's too early. But what came back was more than 80% of our top tier leaders knew. And then a big percentage of all those 8,000 or so managing directors knew. And even more than half of everybody knew. But that was the right shape, because you want it to be from the people leading the business through. And I see that everywhere I look. Every piece of work product that I see the purpose reflected. We've renamed and rethought, for example, some of our major awards programs that we conduct internally. We went back to relook at our talent brand. And the talent brand is all about creating the conditions for human ingenuity to thrive. So there are very, very natural ways, which I think is one sign of, did we land on the right idea and the right language to help guide, Drew, to one of your earlier questions about how's it real? How's it beyond words on a screen?
Interesting. So, I wanted to get to metrics because this is such an important part of it. It's a conversation that CMOs have when they're trying to get to a board level to say, we need to invest in brand. I mean, obviously Accenture's way past that, but one of the questions that comes up is, how are we going to measure it? And how are we going to demonstrate business value for it? And so you touched on, obviously, brand tracking metrics in external metrics. But right. One thing that I think is so important that often is overlooked in these rebrandings is what, as you called it, the talent brand or the employer brand, and how important that is to recruiting. And by the way, it's quite likely will be even more important in the next year or 2 or 3 as we get back to a high level of employment. And not that, in the services world, right, the employment level stayed high. So anyway, I would think that those would be the metrics. I just want to make sure, were there any other important metrics to you that in terms of, and the business value metrics, because we can talk about brand. Have you, with all your sophistication, do you have a sense of when this attribute goes up, business goes up?
Well, so we had our last quarter record-breaking business results in terms of new booking. I mean, just record-breaking. Now, do I take credit for that? No, I do not. That would be obnoxious, wouldn't it? But
oh, come on, somebody has to take credit for it. You got a new brand and a new strategy. How can you not take credit for it?
But what we're able to do, the gift of digital media, is that you can see what is actually driving engagement and what's driving, for example, organic search volume, branded search volume. Who's coming to our website? What are they doing when they get there? And all of that we're tracking very carefully to make sure that we're getting more than our money's worth. And those are the kind of things that I always say it's a fool's errand to try to do actual ROI for most businesses, because it is almost impossible to disentangle cause and effect from all of the dynamics. In a services business, quadruply true because of the role of the individual and the teams and the actual people. So disentangling that, you can find associations and you can find correlation and you can find, am I getting at least my money's worth? And that's what we're looking for.
Right, right. Yeah, you really are subject to sort of classic metrics of brand health and reach, and lift, right? I mean, in lift, you can't, even though you had it, right? You can't take credit for it.
Yes. Yeah,
uh, but you are in that sense, and as you said, I mean, Accenture is not a brand that has an awareness problem.
exactly. Yeah,
So really it comes down to, I guess they'd use the term salience. It's like, are you relevant to the problem that I want to solve right now?
exactly. Yeah. And are you relevant to the growth drivers for our clients and for ourselves, which are, one and the same?
So having gone through this massive undertaking, really, because it's most of the time on the show, we either talk about change the brand or change the purpose or change the business strategy, but we rarely talk about all three in the context of one thing. And so, which is why this show is so interesting to me. In a sense, one should do that because they're all connected, right? And they really should be connected. And when you do them independently, it's problematic. But that's life. What would you say? First of all, were there any huge surprises along the way in any point of this journey of business strategy to purpose to expression of the purchase and the rebranding?
Well, the biggest surprise I have to say is creating, developing, launching an entirely new brand, an effort that involved many, many people, certainly Droga 5 at the heart of it, and additional partners and all of my team and others, all virtually, because having grown up for decades on the ad agency side of life, you look at work in person. And if it's a Sunday meeting, you are, in the hallway looking at the work that's on the ground. It's just, or now on the screen. But to do all of that virtually and to present it virtually, both to, Julie and then to the board, all virtually, I would have thought that would have been just this insurmountable, oh my God, how hard is this? And as we talked among my team, we did it without tears. Maybe that was the most surprising thing.
Right. Yeah, it's funny. I mean, we've sort of all adapted to this, and it'll be interesting as we do get to this hybrid, how things will change. I'm curious if you had to suddenly do this again, God forbid. I know it's a lot. What would you do differently?
Oh, that's such a good question, Drew. Um, I would probably have more faith that it will turn out incredibly well. I think that I had a great guidance from Julie at every step. I have to say, in terms of the process itself, and where I changed my view on what works well had to do with the instead of focusing on speed to the answer, focus on inclusion of the process.
Mm-hmm.
And that I did, but I don't know that I understood it. Now I understand it and would more deliberately craft it.
This came up in the most unlikely. I was at literally, I was watching a teacher last night speak for an hour and a half on the history of slavery, and
Wow.
and it was a fascinating thing. Afterwards, we had a discussion about it. This was among a alumni group, and the thing that was so interesting in this thing is here we are, a bunch of get stuff done people. And what mattered in that moment was not that we were going to solve something that was, 300 years in the making, but that we were in the process. And so I take that what you said, and it's really a stop and think moment, I think, for any driven marketing professional. sometimes it's about the process.
I think it often is, actually.
And we don't think about that because we have our to-do lists and we got to get stuff done. You have a rebrand. All right, well, we got to get a logo done and we got to pick a design and I got to get the right people in the room to prove it. And in something as important as what you're talking about, the process and the inclusion, if you will, being not just the process, but involving people and being open to that input, is fascinating that you would hit on that to me and I would think you as an ex-agency person and as a person who's used, that was kind of hard.
Oh, yeah. No, you're oriented in the opposite direction, actually.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, well, that was a profound little moment, and one that I hope the listeners really truly appreciate, because it is something that, and it's not about stopping and smelling the roses, which is a different story. This is about having people involved, the right people involved, but if in your organization to help get there. Okay. Last question for you before we wrap up, because this is the folks have finished their workout. They're now trying to dry it off. They say, bring it to a close, Drew, please. Give us, if to the audience, if you were to start on this again, 2 do's and a don't in terms of branding. Let's focus on the rebranding process. 2 do's and a don't.
So one to do is change how you learn. Let me start over.
Sure. Go ahead.
So I would say one to do is be very mindful of how you're using virtual platforms. And we're a big user of Teams, but you have to break every bad habit you've ever developed around multitasking when you're doing creative work remotely. And you also have to explain, why are you going off camera?
Yeah.
And why are you going back on camera? And don't text colleagues while people are presenting work. So that's okay. That's a bunch of do. Well, that's a do and a don't simultaneously.
It is.
Did I get a double header with that?
No, yeah, you do. Yeah, you do. And I think that's so important, and it's so hard right now. And this is the big question of, collaboration and are we over Zoomed and all of that. But I think we got so much out of this show. I just want to thank you, Amy, for spending the time with us. Fascinating journey, and certainly wish you the best of luck. So thank you.
Thank you, Drew. Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
And to the listeners, if you enjoyed this episode and are still working out, do me a favor, go to your favorite podcast channel and give us a 6-star review. This was just a fantastic episode. So if I do say so myself. All right. Renegade Thinkers Unite is written and directed by Drew Neiser. Audio production is by Sam Beck. Show notes are written by Melissa Caffrey. The music is by the amazing Burns Twins, and intro voice over is Linda Cornelius. To find the transcripts of all episodes, suggest future guests, and learn more about quite possibly the best B2B marketing agency in New York City, visit renegade.com. I'm your host, Drew Neiser, and until next time, keep those renegade thinking caps on and strong.